ready as well, are we?
So, good morning, and I've got a good friend of mine, Kelvin, with me this morning. I used to work with him in Anfield. He was my boss there, vicar at Christchurch, while I was a church army captain down in Holy Trinity. It was United Benefice, and not only is Kelvin a vicar, he had the really good fortune of being a church army captain too, and I had a great time while I was working with him, and he's got, I think, a fantastic testimony of how he first come to know Jesus. So, Kelvin, tell me, what made you a follower of Jesus, or what sparked the interest in God?
Well, it was down to my wife, Margaret. We were both licensees of a pub just outside Wigan, and it was quite a successful pub and a small restaurant as well. We were doing well. I was in my middle 20s, which I know is young for a licensee, but things were really going well. Unfortunately, for us, but more for my wife, Margaret, her brother died, and in tragic circumstances, while Margaret herself was in hospital, and so it had a profound effect upon her. When at a funeral, his funeral, she felt, or she thought she heard God saying to her something like, "There's more to life than this." And so she started going back to church, which was fine by me. You know, as long as it didn't bother me, that was fine. You know, she can do her own things. But she was drawn into it and realised, and particularly with the vicar who was there at the time, he, in a sermon one particular Sunday, said, you know, just because you come into church, it doesn't mean you're a Christian. And so that really struck her. And so she questioned around. Anyway, to cut that short story a bit short, she actually came to faith in Jesus through Journey into Life, the booklet.
Oh, right.
So that's, So that's
going
when
back a few years, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's still a good book.
Yeah.
Now that started a few problems for us, because I was still running the pub with Margaret as well, but Margaret had become this new enthusiastic Christian, and in some ways we were living life on two parallel tracks really, and so it was a really difficult time for us for a couple of years actually, because she was now trying to live a life as a Christian, I was living my life as it was before. But one thing I noticed was that her life was changing, and she talked about prayer and answers to prayer. So I was slowly drawn in to become curious about this Christian faith. And though we did have a few, awkward moments, particularly on one Good Friday, she wanted to put a sign up in the pub saying "He is risen," or he's crucified and then he's risen on the Sunday. She put it up, and I said, "Well, that's as far as you go. There's no more. We're not having religion in the pub." But it did become that I became more curious about it. And then one of the good things for me was that I was still thinking that this Christianity stuff, this church was female. It was all to do with women.
Yeah.
And then over that time, more and more men began to admit to me they were Christians, and they were regulars in the pub. So these were just, for me, just normal guys, just blokes coming in for a pint, but admitting they were Christians. And so that really began to make me more than curious now, but became really, almost I could say, on the edge of searching in a way.
Yeah.
And I kept this, in a sense, to myself quiet, really, because I didn't know where to go with it. And then the point which caused the moment when I submitted, in a sense, was the business was getting busier, and it was getting, we were doing well. And I had a chef that was working with us who was Moroccan, brilliant guy, but we got on terribly. We were so many rows between me and him because he was passionate. He wanted things done. This was my business, and I was trying to make sure it was all. So it was constant arguing and problems, and it was really disturbing me because, in a sense, it was disturbing the atmosphere as well. And I thought business had to be good because it was a good atmosphere as well as serving good food. And so, one particular night, early evening, I was just getting a bit fed up of all this falling out and fighting, and so I kept remembering Margaret kept saying about prayer, prayer answers some of the problems that we have. And so I remember praying this particular early evening, Lord, I just need this problem sorted out with this guy in whatever form, because we can't keep going on this. In fact, it was probably getting on me. It was probably making me nervous, apprehensive all the time.
Yeah.
And so the following day, I came downstairs and I knew, sorry, the downstairs, what I mean by that, our flat was upstairs. So I came downstairs to the pub this particular day, and the chef was already in. I could hear him banging around in the kitchen getting stuff ready for the lunchtime trade. And I walked into the kitchen with no particular worry or anything. But as I walked in, I could see something was wrong. And he turned around to me and said, "I'm sorry, Kelvin, I've got some bad news." Oh, right. And so my stomach turned over thinking, this is it. And then he turned around and said, "I'm finishing." What? It's only the night before I'd prayed for an answer. And so inside, I was jumping up and down. But on the outside, I'm saying, "Are you sure? Why are you leaving?" "Well, I've been offered a better job." So there's no argument. So we had a short conversation. I can't remember that. But I walked away thinking, was that an answer to prayer, or was that just coincidence?
Well, that's what happens, isn't it, when you believe in God? Them coincidences.
That's right. So I didn't realise the theological implications at the time about this. But then a few weeks later, Margaret was now a Sunday school teacher in our local church. And she came home one night and she was talking about a lesson for that Sunday. And I was talking to her, I was listening to her. And then she simply said, bless her, and this is Margaret's gift. She said to me, "Have you ever prayed?" And I said, yeah. But she wouldn't let go. She said, "Well, when did you pray?" I said, "Well, when Omar gave his notice in," I said, "Well, I'd prayed the night before that this problem with me and him would get sorted out. And so I think probably, maybe, that he left because of my prayer." And so she said, "Well, if you know that he's answering your prayers like this, in time you did something, isn't it time, you made that decision?" And so, believe it or not, and thankfully the pub was shut, we knelt down behind the bar, both of us, and I prayed that Jesus would come into my life. And of course, he did.
And what difference did that make? That sounds brilliant.
Well, for me, it was quite a dramatic conversion because I was quite elated for many, many weeks, I think. I mean, I can't remember, but it just seemed like for a long time I was on cloud nine. And every time I prayed a prayer, it seemed to be answered. I remember there was a concern about Great Ormond Street Hospital closing in London, the Children's Hospital. And I remember sat on the couch upstairs having my tea and praying, "Lord, that's wrong. It can't close." Well, it didn't. So I put it down to my prayer, taking that others were praying. But it just seemed that everything was going so well. Everything was working well. Our relationship now, we're on not parallel tracks, we're on the same tracks. Business was doing really well. Started going to church, which is another story in itself. But so those first few weeks were quite dramatic, relatable, and dramatic in a way for me.
Yeah, that sounds really great. And then you found Church Army.
Yeah, well, that was another story in a way, because almost within a year, I felt a calling to some time of full-time ministry, and so I started to search all over the place. I'd heard about the OM ships, Logos and Doulos. Yeah. So for a time, we thought about that. And so one of the natural things I started to look for was for ordination, to be a vicar.
Yes.
So I went to a vocational conference, as they call them, where you can check out these things at Trinity College in Bristol. George Carey was the principal then. And so it was a good few days. Well, I said it was a good few days. The outcome was no one knew what to do with me. George Carey said to me, "You probably wouldn't cope with the academic work." And in a sense, though I found that pretty dramatic, him saying such like that, it was actually true. It was right. And so I left that weekend really feeling low, thinking I was giving myself, checking out what God wanted me to do, and finding the door was shut. But literally, as I walked out through the door to come home, I met a man called John Ball, who was then chair of what is now BCMS, the Bible Medical Missionary Society.
Yeah.
I don't know what it was called in those days. Oh, that was right. I think it's called Crosslinks now, but I can't be sure.
Yeah.
I can't be sure of that. But he said, "How have you found this weekend?" I said, "Well, in the end, not really helpful, because I hadn't found or hadn't discerned where I thought God was calling me to." He quickly said, "Well, what do you do?" I told him I was a publican, a licensee, I was on a pub and all that. He said, "Oh, no problem. Church Army or one of the inner city missions. Either of those, you'll fit great." I never heard of either of them. And so once I got home, we had a discussion with Margaret. I found somebody, I think it was somebody in church, asked me about Church Army, sent for the bump from that, and so I did, and then began the discernment for church calling for Church Army.
Wow. Well, so that's cool. And then later on, I know you got ordained, and then you started in Anfield. But just want to come forward a few years now, and just how have you found your Christian faith has helped you in lockdown over the last few weeks? You know, because we're all stuck indoors and feeling depressed. You know, do you think that has helped, or do you think it's just?
Well, I suppose for me, I don't have a huge problem about being isolated.
Yeah.
Because I'm not an extreme extrovert.
No.
But I mean, still, it's telling. I mean, I know, but for that,
Yeah.
so it's not hugely desperate. But I think for like most of us, I've tried to make sure I've got a rhythm and a routine, and so meeting up with people online, checking out people are all right is keeping me busy. Definitely reading stuff which I promised I should have read a long time ago. Questions I had and now searching them out. I would say to some degree my prayer life, but not in a dramatic way. I mean, I think I've been for some time quite happy with my prayer life. I've had quite a sustainable rhythm to my prayer life for a few years, and I suspect that's kept me sane.
Yes.
And because of the lockdown, and we're forced to face some of the issues that we see glaringly, obviously, not just in our society but worldwide, it has brought up for me the bigger issues for us to try and, well, how we're going to sort this out and tackle it. I mean, we've talked about this, about how will the church be when we get back out of this. And though I'm not a leader in a church in the way I was before, since I'm now retired, I just hope that we don't go back to the way we were. I think there will be lessons that we've learned for all of us, but I hope we don't just go back or feel a desire to go back to the way things were before.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think that's my prayer too, that things will change, and especially with the stuff we're doing online, which has been really interesting, hasn't it?
Yeah,
So,
I mean, the big change for me is that, and it's something I've banged on about for ages, and the church does get, it's not like I'm the only one, but I think it was Mike Breen said that if we build the church, discipleship rarely follows. But if we build disciples, the church just comes with it as part of that.
oh, that's good. That's good.
Yeah, I still think even though we're into discipleship in a bigger way than we have been for a long time, I still think we're in trying to build a church. I still think we're putting more effort and energy into working what we know as we call the attractional church. And it just doesn't work. I mean, for some it does, but for the majority of churches, Anfield, Workshop, wherever, it just doesn't really work. It's got to be lives which are transformed into discipleship. The beautifulness will be the natural things which will create an interest and attract other people to Jesus.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
in fact, I'm just going to read a book again, which I read 20 years ago, by Walter Brueggemann. It's called Prophetic Imagination. And I
yeah,
think we are called to live out a life which is prophetic, not just by the words we say, but by the lives we live.
yes,
This is the alternative life in the world that we live, and we're called to demonstrate it. And so I
no.
think that could be able to power. But I mean, thankfully, I'm not a bishop. But
Yeah, I'm pleased you're not a bishop.
yeah, we've been a right mess.
I'd be sacked by now.
Yeah. But you know what I mean? They've got this thing to try and keep things going, and struggling in that, of course. But for me, we've got to really focus on how we create disciples, even small communities of disciples, wherever they are.
Yes. That's interesting, because the way I look at it, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but if we're not allowed to meet in bigger groups, it might be that church actually starts in home groups first, mightn't it?
Yeah,
Which I think could be quite revolutionary for us, and they say all things work to the good. Well, the Bible says that, and I think that could be really interesting.
yeah,
Being smaller community of
yeah,
Christians in the
yeah,
months to
yeah.
come. Maybe. I mean, we don't know. But
Yeah. I think you're right, and the things with a smaller group, which is a church which is focused on its task of mission, will, in a sense, create in itself
yeah,
discipleships. You end up holding each other accountable. It's just like when we've worked together, and there's been a small few of us, like we've done a holiday club, something. We've had to work together to do that,
yes,
and had to work out what we're doing together in attempting to achieve the task that's been set before us. And if that was replicated on a lot of bases in small groups, I think we could make a bigger difference. Though I think we have to get off the platform of saying we want to win the country for Jesus. Of course we do,
yes,
but let's just get on and do it,
yeah, yeah,
because that will follow.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's fantastic, Kelvin. Well, thank you for spending some time and chatting to me. It's just
That's
been
good.
good to see you, and how your faith journey went along, and especially those words at the end, just thinking on what may be next for the church, which has given us food for thought, I hope. So
Okay.
thank you, Kelvin. God
Okay.
bless.
Good. See you later.
Well, yeah, I'll just press stop recording.